He went to Everest to tell other people's stories. Then, the mountain rewrote his. One minute, Tom Taplin was walking the maze of tents at base camp, trading smiles with climbers and Sherpa teams, collecting the small details that make a film feel honest. The next moment, the ground shivered like a living thing. A low rumble rolled up the glacier, heads snapped toward Pumori, and in a breath, a white wall exploded across the camp, faster than anyone could process, flattening canvas, hurling gear, and turning the safest place on the mountain into a blast zone. It wasn't a storm, but this danger started underground, a violent jolt that ripped through Nepal and sent a shock straight into the Himalaya. At 5,300 meters, there are no quiet emergencies. Every sound is bigger, every second shorter, every choice, inside a tent or out in the open. Suddenly the difference between a close call and a catastrophe. Tom had come back to this valley more than once. He knew the rhythm of mornings when the sun hits the western Coombe, the afternoon hush when fatigue settles in, the way base camp turns into a tiny city that runs on tea, radio chatter, and big dreams. He wasn't chasing the summit, he was chasing people, the cooks, the rope fixers, the climbers nursing doubts, because that's where the real Everest lives. What happened next would shake the mountain community far beyond that day. It raised hard questions about safety, about where we put our camps, about whether anyone can outplan a place this wild. But first, to make sense of why he was there when everything went sideways, we need to rewind to the person behind the camera, the filmmaker who kept returning to the Khumbu. Tom Taplin grew up far from the Himalaya, but the pull of high places found him early. Denver roots, Vail seasons. Later, Santa Monica for work. He was a documentarian who chased human stories, quiet, close-up, unscripted. Friends say he loved the part that most people skip, listening. He married Cornelia Corey Fryer and kept a life that balanced mountains with film. Grants, small crews, long days. He shot projects that lived on public television and the indie circuit, the kind of films that notice the cook in the mess tent and the porter who jokes in 3 languages. He wasn't chasing summits, he chased people in the small truths they carry. Everest had become a recurring chapter. He had been to the Khumbu multiple times, long enough to know which boulders warm first in the morning and which paths turned slick by noon. This time, his focus was base camp itself, the pop-up city at 5,300 meters, radios crackling, solar panels blinking, prayer flags snapping above coolers and oxygen cylinders. He wanted the anthropology of it, how people build routine in a place designed to break routine. He moved quietly with a small camera, tea before questions, a few interviews before lunch, notes scribbled in a weathered notebook, names spelled right, tea before questions. He had a way of vanishing into the background until people forgot the lens and started telling the truth. Experience should have favored him. He knew the terrain, the altitude tricks, the rhythm of acclimatization days. If there's a safe zone on Everest, base camp usually feels like it. Doctors nearby, guides everywhere. 1,000 eyes and spare hands when anything goes wrong. On that April morning, it looked like every other shooting day. April 25th, 2015, late morning at base camp. Calm air, radio chatter, tea cooling, then the glacier growled. A 7.8 earthquake hit Nepal, and the shock punched straight into Everest. Heads snapped to Pumori. A pale plume swelled into a roaring wall. Snow, ice, and pulverized rock, driven by a brutal pressure wave. This wasn't a gentle slide. It was a blast that leapt the moraine and erased the camp in white. Tents ripped, poles folded, tables turned to shrapnel. Some people dove behind boulders or into tent floors. Others were caught in the open with nowhere to hide. Inside the cloud, sound warped. 10 seconds felt endless. Then a second hit, harder, before the air finally thinned and shapes returned. Collapsed shelters, tangled lines, people staggering upright, coughing, calling names. Survival came down to one thing. Were you under anything when the wave arrived? The wind died as fast as it came. Radios sputtered alive, and the triage began. But that wasn't the end of it, because what happened next would test rescue crews at the top of the world. In under half a minute, base camp flipped from routine to survival mode. People dove for rocks, dug into the lee side of boulders, or flattened into tent floors. Those few feet mattered. The pressure wave bulldozed anything exposed, launched debris, and filled lungs with dust that made every breath a fight. Confusion hit as hard as the wind. Radios spat half calls. Early numbers on injuries and deaths bounced around the camp and the outside world, changing by the hour. In that fog, the only clarity was local. Who was moving, who wasn't, and who needed hands right now. Tom Taplin had been where he always was, close to people, camera in hand, tracking the small rhythms of base camp. When the blast tore through, he was caught in it. By day's end, friends confirmed he was among the Americans lost. Across the moraine, triage pods popped up. Cooks became medics. Climbers became stretcher crews. Sherpa teams ran point. Tape, splints, oxygen, whatever they had, they used. The goal was simple: keep the living stable until rotors could reach them. But help at 5,300 meters isn't a phone call away, and the air itself fights the machines you need. The next step would be a lifeline of helicopters, risky flights, and hard choices about who leaves first. Night fell with headlamps and taped tarps. By first light, the thud of rotors cut through the thin air. Pilots threaded narrow weather windows, hopped the glacier, and set down on patches of flattened ice that barely counted as pads. Each landing was a gamble, density altitude high, winds twitchy, visibility shifting minute to minute. Ground teams sorted priorities fast: stabilize, load, lift. Shuttles ran to Fariche and onto bigger hospitals down valley. Sherpa crews cleared landing zones with shovels and boots, flagged approaches with scraps of bright fabric, and guided stretchers through a maze of torn guy lines. Guides turned into air traffic, counting minutes between flights, matching names to injuries, keeping panic from flooding the queue. The helicopters felt like a miracle, but they couldn't fix everything. Weather snapped shut, fuel and weight ruled, and every lift was a trade. One patient now or two later. Move supplies or move people. In the pauses, base camp worked like a field clinic. Splints, oxygen, hot drinks, quiet words that held the edges together. By afternoon, the outline of the day hardened. Survivors outbound, the lost accounted for. The season was over, and with the immediate crisis blunted, a tougher question pushed in. What did this disaster say about how Everest operates when the stakes spike? Base camp was never meant to be a bullseye, but 2015 exposed how fragile that assumption is. The camp grows every spring, more teams, more tents, more gear, because the climb is commercial now. That scale brings jobs and opportunity. It also multiplies targets when the mountain throws a punch. Then there's location. Camp sits on a moving glacier tucked below Pumori and the icefall. Most seasons that's fine. On a quake day, it isn't. After the blast, operators and officials argued, should parts of camp shift farther from known slide paths? Could safer zones be marked and enforced when teams compete for flat ground and short walks to the route? Preparedness became the next fight. Many expeditions had medkits and solid plans, but the disaster showed gaps, communication choke points, limited mass casualty supplies, and no shared drill across dozens of teams. Some leaders pushed for standardized safety briefings, common siren signals, more hardened shelters, and a map everyone respects when alarms start. How much risk is acceptable on the one piece of ground that's supposed to be predictable? That question isn't abstract when families are waiting at home, and when storytellers like Tom are there to record the truth. Away from the noise, Tom was the calm in the room. Soft questions, long listens. He'd rather earn trust than chase a headline. Friends remember a guy who'd haul extra batteries for someone else and still stop to drink tea with the kitchen staff. That's how his footage felt. Close, human, never in a rush. His career didn't run on red carpets. It ran on grit, grants, small crews, late edits, screenings where the credits roll and he's already packing cases. He had ties to public television and indie circles, the spaces where detail matters more than hype. In the Khumbu, that meant shining a light on people most viewers never meet. The rope fixers, the porters, the clinic volunteers who hold a pulse steady when the weather turns. He kept returning because he wasn't done telling that story, not the tallest flag on the summit story, the other one, about community at altitude, where every tent is a household and every choice echoes. That's why his final project hit so hard. He went to show base camp on a normal day. That day, normal disappeared, and that leaves the question nobody likes asking. Could any of it have been avoided? You can't stop a tectonic jolt, but you can stack the odds. After 2015, guides and officials rechecked risk maps around Pomori's slide paths, flagged lower exposure zones, and talked about hard rules for where the first rows of tents go. Some teams added quick-run shelters, simple dugouts or reinforced mess tents, places where a few seconds could blunt a blast. Warning systems help, but base camp isn't a city with sirens and cell towers that never fail. Radios die. Batteries freeze. What works is muscle memory. Fast cues everyone knows, drills that turn seconds into action, and a shared map that matters more than convenience. Even then, nothing at 5,300 meters is guaranteed. You buy time, not certainty. So, was it preventable? The quake, number, the outcome, maybe a little. Fewer exposed walkways, clear shelter points, common signals across camps that don't compete, but cooperate. None of that changes what happened to Tom. It does honor it by pushing the place he loved to get smarter when the ground moves again. When the air crews stopped flying and the camp fell quiet, base camp looked like a memory, flags torn, tent floors flattened into the ice. The season ended, teams packed out. For many, the hardest miles were the ones going home with empty spaces on their rosters. Tom's name moved from radio traffic to remembrances. Friends and local papers didn't talk about him as a thrill chaser. They talked about a listener who showed up, asked better questions, and kept coming back because the people mattered. In a place famous for altitude records, he carried the smaller record: how many lives he noticed. The story he wanted, how a pop-up city works under the world's highest peak, didn't disappear. If anything, it sharpened. 2015 forced a reckoning about where tents sit, how teams share signals, how fast clinics spin up when minutes count. None of that undoes the loss. But it means the next crew standing on that ice might have one more safe option when the ground growls. His legacy is simple and heavy. Tell the human part first. Not just who reached the top, but who brewed the tea, who hauled the rope, who held the line when the wind hit. That's the Everest most people never see. That's the one Tom kept trying to film. He went to Everest to capture other people's truths and ended up part of the mountain's harshest chapter. A quake lit the fuse, a blast erased the idea of a safe zone, and decisions in seconds drew the line between luck and loss. The debates will continue: commercial crowds, camp maps, drills, and warnings. But one question lingers after the rotors fade. If the point of climbing is to know what matters, what do we owe the people who make it possible? Tom's answer was to listen. Ours might be to keep them safer the next time the ice starts to roar. Here's the dilemma. The more we open the mountain, the more responsibility we carry to protect the very people who make those stories possible. So, where's the line? How much risk is worth the view?